Welcome to the Inspiring Sustainability Podcast. This is Adam Woodhall, and I'm delighted to welcome Joesph of Trustees Unlimited to a conversation with me about how his organisation is helping inspire sustainability in our world. So welcome, Ian.
Thank you.
So what I'd like to do first off, just very briefly, give me an introduction to yourself, your role at Trustees Unlimited, maybe a little bit about your other career that you might have had before or even during, and maybe a little bit about your life outside of work as well.
Thanks, Adam. Well, it's very good to join you on this podcast. I've had a fairly eclectic career, I must say, beginning life as a church minister before moving into the charity sector, cutting my teeth working with the homeless and those with drug addiction. And then, as many in the sector told me at the time, I sold my soul to the devil and crossed over and became a headhunter, cutting my teeth, recruiting the CEOs of the likes of the RSPCA and the National Autistic Society and a number of other well-known charities. So I've been doing this line of work now for about 10 years, and have throughout that period always been a trustee myself, currently a trustee of an Olympic legacy charity called Cyclopark. Just in terms of Trustees Unlimited, we set that up about 7 years ago. I say we, it's an unusual business model in that it's a hybrid organisation, a combination of the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, which is a charity, Joesph Breakaway, two of the leading lawyers in the charity sector, and Russell GMS, of which I'm one of the two MDs, and we're one of the oldest recruitment businesses in the country, working at C-suite across all different sectors. And we set up Trustees Unlimited 7 years ago because we felt there was a real need for charities, particularly smaller ones, to tap into a much richer, broader talent pool of potential trustees. And my role at Trustees Unlimited is essentially I run that as well as the Russian business, and it's been going very well.
Yeah, it sounds like an interesting growth of both yourself and also the organisation. So just quickly, actually, you've talked about the partners, but how's the Trustees Unlimited funded?
Well, Trustees Unlimited itself is a commercial business, but it trades for a social purpose. Now, because we're a third charity rather than 50%, I think legally we can't be described as a social enterprise, but in many respects that's what we are. It obviously needs to make a profit to wipe its face, but it's a commercial business. And where we get our revenue from is through the work we do with non-profits. We have a sliding scale of different services that we offer, anything from advertising right through to the full bells and whistles headhunting, but also revenues generated through the Step on Board program, which I think we might be coming on to talk about in just a moment.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's really interesting that you've got a model that you're not dependent on other organisations. It's like you're more like a business in that sense.
Yeah, correct.
To hear.
And actually, Adam, just a quick one on that. Yeah. We were one of the first B corporations in the UK. I think there were 27 initially, of which actually Joesph Breakaway were one. And that's a tag given to commercial businesses, but that trade with the highest of sort of ethical standards and taking into account things like environmental sustainability and doing things the right way. So yeah, very much a commercial business, but with a social heart pumping inside it.
Yes, and we could spend the rest of the podcast talking about B Corps because it's fascinating, but it's fantastic that you are B Corp, because one of the things is it's not easy to become a B Corp. So it shows your commitment not just to the service that you provide to your clients, but also to a holistic sustainability, which is fantastic to hear. And yes, you talked you alluded towards the Step on Board program, which I'm particularly interested in. So tell me a bit more about how that's inspiring some social sustainability.
Yeah, well, the Step on Board program, it's run in partnership between the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, NCVO, and Trustees Unlimited. And it really emerged out of the work NCVO were doing with Barclays, and essentially what happened was they engaged us to talk about how we might help some of their most senior people move on to non-profit boards, and that's how it came about. 2 years ago, we started to engage with them and developed what was for them called the Barclays Board Placement Program, that has now become something much more far-reaching called our Step on Board program. But essentially, it's working with commercial businesses, helping either some of their most senior talented people or some of their rising stars move on to non-profit boards. And underpinning it all is this belief that there's huge untapped potential in businesses and charities working together in order to meet a collective suite of goals.
Yeah, no, and it's definitely fascinating. So, tell me a bit more about this. I mean, why do you think individuals would want to step up to this, and why corporates should be encouraging their people to step up?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a bit of research has been done on this over the years, and one question: why would people want to be trustees? Well, I think 4 things spring to mind. I mean, one is people often want to engage with their local communities in a more profound way, and certainly with people in professional careers who sometimes can feel a bit transient. Actually, they leave the office at leave the house at 6:30 in the morning, and they're back at silly o'clock, and actually they're just passing through. And so one reason people become trustees is they want to engage in their local community. Another is to progress a cause that they feel really passionate about. And when you talk to people, sometimes people will say, look, it's cancer, or it's kids, or it's animals, or whatever it is. And perhaps they've been giving money, but actually what they want to do is leverage their skills and talents in a more sustainable way, and so they use their skills on a board. And the other thing is that people want to learn new skills. Now, that can't be the overriding factor for why you join a board of trustees, but it tends to be a byproduct, and a very powerful one at that. I mean, a phrase that I've heard coined that sort of sums this all up recently is that it's beyond painting sheds. And I think historically, a lot of people, their commercial volunteer programs are, let's go and paint a school, but number one, there's only so many schools you can paint, and number two, volunteers never really do it very well, and it all feels a bit vacuous. So I think individuals want to do something more sustainable, but I think from an employer's point of view, CIPD did some research in 2015, and they talked about how 65% of employees are more likely to work for an employer that actively encourages volunteering. And when you look at sort of generation Y or Z or A, I'm not even sure where we are in the generations now, but when you look at millennials, sometimes their purchasing decision, if you like, if they've got 2 offers on the plate with 2 commercial organizations, is actually to go to the one that has more of a socially orientated mindset. So I think there are some of the reasons why individuals, but also corporates. And the other thing from a corporate point of view is when the magic really happens is when a commercial entity recognizes that CSR and HR can come together. So talent and their corporate social responsibility, and they meet perfectly at the place where an employee becomes a trustee of an organization, because on the one hand they're reflecting the values of their commercial organization, but they're also giving back and they're learning themselves as well.
That's great. I already think I might know what the title of this, the article that I write about this podcast is going to be, which is Where the Magic Happens, maybe. That'd be a nice title, wouldn't it?
I think it would be terrific, absolutely.
So that's, I mean, it's fascinating, but what I'm sure the listeners will be very interested in is some examples, case studies of how it's been successful either for the individuals, the non-profits, or the employers, the corporates that are involved.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're working with a raft of corporates at the moment, including Barclays, who we originally set the program up with, Google, PA Consulting, RBS, Mishcon de Rare, the law firm. There's a number that we're working with. But 2 examples spring to mind, really. One is some work we did with a charity called Dreams Come True, which is a national children's charity, and essentially what they do is they bring joy to children and young people with serious and life-limiting conditions. And one of the things in their strategic plan was to increase the number of dreams they fulfill, but they recognized that in order to do this, they needed to recruit trustees with a business background who have very strong financial experience. And we knew the charity anyway, having been involved with the CEO and having done some trustee recruitment for them. And we put it out actually to some of the people on this Step on Board program, two of whom ended up being appointed to the board. One, a chap called Andy Chalice, and a woman called Miranda Abraham, both senior directors of Barclays with very long job titles, all to do with strategic investments and investment banking and syndicates and all this sort of thing that I don't fully understand. But nevertheless, they joined the board and have been on the board for, goodness, it must be well over a year now. And they've both added tremendous value to the board. And Sally herself, the chair, has been really, really excited about their contribution. The other one that springs to mind is actually something quite close to my heart, and that involves sort of younger trustees. And so we were doing some work with an organisation called LHA London, which was set up during the Blitz, quite a large organisation that provides high quality accommodation in London for students, young professionals, people moving to London for the first time, perhaps on an apprenticeship, and who are a bit sort of starry-eyed and out of sorts because they come to this big city from somewhere else, and so they give them a leg up. And Tony Perkins, the CEO, I've known for many years, he said that they reviewed their charitable objects, and what they wanted to do was better engage with their beneficiaries, who are relatively young, but when they looked around the boardroom, they realized that they had very few younger people on the board, so they said, how can we get some younger people? And Trustees Unlimited was doing some work with them, and we tapped into one of the young lawyers we were working with at Mishcon de Reya, who I first met when she was 29, a wonderful young woman called Alexandra Whitson-Dew, a media lawyer. She came onto the Step on Board program. We introduced her to LHA. I think she'd just turned 30 by the time we introduced her, but nevertheless still relatively young. And they were so impressed with not only her legal credentials, but her understanding of social media, how to communicate with young people, that they took her onto the board. And she's been such a blessing to them. She's brought this sort of sense of being in touch with younger people, but she's thrown herself in heart and soul. And when we were doing the last round of recruitment, she was on the panel and heavily involved. And so for Alexandra, it's been wonderful, great experience. But actually for LHA, they've got this really sharp young lawyer on their board. And quite frankly, I don't think they would have found her if it hadn't been for the Step on Board program.
Yeah, that sounds fabulous. Got some great examples there. Thank you. Now, one of the things I asked you, coming to yourself and your journey a bit, I'm intrigued about how you've been finding it. So one of the first things that comes to mind is that you were probably a pretty busy guy before you became CEO of Trustees Unlimited. So what inspired you to wear the two hats that you've got that you described at the start of this conversation?
Yeah, well, I think the world increasingly we're wearing lots of hats, and first and foremost, I guess my main hat is that of a husband, and then as a father to three small kids. So yeah, I've got a pretty busy life, but I think for me the work of Trustees Unlimited is a joy, not a burden, and I say that in the sense that I'm really passionate about governance, not governance for its own sake, but governance because if you get it right, the impact on the beneficiaries is quite profound. And I've been around long enough now to see that when governance goes wrong, the consequences are really tragic. We only need to sort of look at Kids Company and all sorts of other things. But when it goes well, it's really amazing. And for me, my passion is about how can you help the most number of people the most effectively. And I think it starts with getting the right boards of trustees. And so, I'm busy, absolutely, like yourself, Adam, and probably like everybody listening, lots on, never enough time to do things. But I think this is, governance and helping people is absolutely the driving force behind it.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear because, as an aside, but important question, have you found that the unfortunate collapse of Kids Company in a high profile last year, has that affected in any shape or form people's confidence around this, or what's been your experience around that?
Yeah, I think governance, it was quite prescient when we set up Trustees Unlimited because I remember saying at the time there's going to be increased public scrutiny, there's going to be increased scrutiny from the media, and lo and behold, that's all come to bear. I've heard people say that a number of individuals have been put off becoming trustees because of things like Kids Company. I actually would say completely the opposite. I think there is a wealth of talent out there who really want to contribute, and it's about understanding the duties of being a trustee. The Charity Commission have updated their CC3 guidance this year. It's excellent. It's really clear. I think the courts take a very sensible approach, which is they recognise people are doing this because they really want to contribute and make a big difference. And I think if you want to make a difference, nothing's going to stop you doing that. So in some perverse sort of way, I think Kids Company debacle has, in some respects, shaken up governance in the sector and made people realise if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right and we're going to do it properly. And so there's a silver lining there, but I've certainly not seen a dearth of people wanting to come forward. Quite the contrary.
No, fabulous. That's good to hear. And so obviously the collapse of Kids Company was a very uncomfortable lesson for those involved in it, which included right up to David Cameron as the Prime Minister then, who put his own personal backing to it. But then hopefully you've not had uncomfortable lessons on that scale, but we all have them. So what maybe have you had as lessons, and have you learned from those since you joined Trustees Unlimited?
Yeah, I mean, it has the way of life, and certainly in recruitment. I see this in our Russell business as well. You know, when you're dealing with people will invariably let you down or not behave in the way you think they will. And I guess a couple of things spring to mind. I mean, one is I remember we did a job for a charity, and we found some really good candidates. The preferred candidate met the chair, then met the CEO. They both loved the candidate, and the agenda item of the board, the next board meeting, the agenda item one was the appointment of said candidate. So they duly did that, and then at the end of the board meeting, the rest of the trustees said, why on earth did we appoint that chap? He's totally disruptive and his behaviours aren't right. And for me, this was very early on, but it was a big lesson in that a potential trustee and a potential charity, I think, should not rush into consummating the relationship. I think you can take time walking up the aisle, if you like. The advice I've always given since then is there's no harm at that first board meeting having the designate trustee candidate attend as an observer, so that they can witness the board, and then the board can witness the individual. So that was one big lesson. And I guess the second one related to that is how important it is for potential trustees to just understand who else is on the board. I was doing a bit of work with a charity that had 3 members of the House of Lords on it, very well-known members of the House of Lords. I attended one of their board meetings. Granted, not all the law lords were there, but I'd never been part of such a dysfunctional board, and the chair and the chief exec had a big argument, and then they turned to me for advice, and at that point I was sort of hiding under the table. I was like a celebrity, get me out of here, except obviously I wasn't a celebrity. And I just thought, so there was a lesson there about just because you've got big names on a board doesn't mean the board is well run. And so the advice I often give to potential trustees is check that the chair is not a little Napoleon who sort of suppresses debate and essentially manages things, but also actually check that the CEO doesn't manage the board, and that balance is struck right. So I'd say there are 2 of the lessons I've learned.
Well, that's a lesson that some of the boards of the corporations could do with learning as well, I think.
Absolutely.
But that's, again, another podcast on that one. So that's maybe some of the uncomfortable stuff. I'm sure there's actually been, and what's kept you passionate about this and inspired is things that you found fulfilling. So maybe 1 or 2 things that you found really fulfilling since you've become involved in Trustees Unlimited.
Yeah, I mean, the overriding thing is knowing that the work we're doing is transforming lives. That has to be absolutely the most important thing. But I think what's been really rewarding is just to see, and certainly in financial services, bankers and things often get a bad rap, and it wasn't so long ago that if you said, at a cocktail party or something, you were a banker, no one would talk to you, and they'd take away your canapes or whatever. Actually, having spent so much time with bankers, with serious people in commerce, and seeing the passion that they have to step up and to be trustees, to really give, but also to actually dig behind their lives a little bit and to see how many of them, unsung, are engaged in community activities and doing things. To me, that's been incredibly rewarding and actually really heartening to recognize that, the UK is known throughout the world as having volunteers, millions of volunteers doing it, and to see that it's really happening and people want to carve out time in their busy diaries to do things for other people. That's been incredibly rewarding.
Fantastic. Yeah, brilliant. That sounds very fulfilling. And as a final question then, what or who inspires you to keep turning up and juggling all these balls that you're juggling, and particularly obviously with Trustees Unlimited and the Step on Board program specifically?
Yeah, I think there's so many things which I won't go into, of course, but obviously having a sort of deep faith helps personally. I think knowing the work we're doing is actually changing people's lives. The founding chair of Trustees Unlimited was a chap called Stephen Lloyd, who at the time was managing partner of Basewell's Braithwaite, sadly deceased now and a great loss to many, but I think his passion for the work we were doing really inspires me. And then I guess just knowing that we're making a difference, we're really helping and getting up every day and thinking, today we are actually going to help an organisation get their governance right, and in turn that's going to help the lives of drug addicts or even animals. I'm not a huge animal fan, although I've got a Labrador, but actually it's really important work, and knowing that the work we're going to do today is going to transform the lives of some sentient being or another is really, really important.
That's brilliant. Right, well, that's a fantastic note having to finish this conversation on. And so it just remains for me to thank you, Ian, for your time, sharing your experience and your learnings and your successes. And I wish you and the program every success going forward. Thank you.
Adam, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
And yes, so this is the end of today's Inspiring Sustainability podcast. Thank you to the listeners for joining us, and I look forward to joining you on another podcast in the near future. Goodbye.